What if freedom was taken but never granted? If the man who professed to love you had previously taken control of your life, how would you respond? If you wanted to force a prominent guy to choke on his own legacy, how far would you go? This is not merely a tale of love and treachery. It tells the tale of a slave who evolved into something much more sinister. A woman who waited in the blazing sun of Adams County, Mississippi, and who recalled everything. Like sentinels, the magnolia trees stood indifferently, blossoming. Among them all, the Wycliffe plantation splayed across the ground like a wound, gushing cotton and quiet. Ada had never ventured outside its borders in 1849. She was born in the backwaters to a woman by the name of May, who was formerly a seamstress in Virginia and is now a ghost beneath Wycliffe's dirt. May was charged with stealing a brooch that was later discovered to have been misplaced by the mistress. But in that house, honesty was worthless. Property was the only one that did. And May had received the appropriate punishment for being property, chained to the whipping post for 3 days. Before her body failed, she had 2 more. Ada was 6 years old. She recalled every detail. Ada, who was now 17, walked through the large home like a whisper. She was continually reminded, appreciated, and watched as a house slave. Her hands were clean but not soft, her skin was lighter than others, and her speech was measured. She had once been described as almost Gentile by the mistress, who had long since died of yellow fever. To others, but not to her face, the master, Amos Wycliffe, called her nothing at all. "The quiet one knows her place and is good for work," he observed. However, Ada had a secret that expanded with her bones, a recollection of her mother's gaze rather than her cries. May's half-closed eyes met Ada's through puffy lids on that last morning following the lashes. Ada had never forgotten that gaze, yet there had been no words. Amos Wycliffe was a man carved out of stone and gunpowder. It said, "You are not weak. You are not theirs. Remember me not as a victim, but as a warning." He governed the plantation with a theological sense of hierarchy after serving as a soldier and later becoming a cotton baron. God, white man below, above, and the rest somewhere under the ground. The everyday routines were etched with his regulations. Silent meals, no reading, no eye contact, no sunrise bell, and no rest unless granted. In his study, he maintained a ledger of violations, complete with names, dates, and penalties. It has been 3 years since Ada's name was mentioned. Early on, she had discovered that obedience did not equate to submission. It was disguised. Her eyes were downcast, her mind more intelligent than her years, betrayed, and still folded under linen skirts. When others believed she couldn't listen, she did. Learned the weight of footsteps, and committed the cadence of dialogue to memory in the parlor. She was aware of which traders were dangerous and which were intoxicated. At night, she was aware of which field workers murmured about the stars, the north, names like Tubman, and safe homes that were passed off as churches. Nevertheless, she remained silent until Nathaniel's return. The sole son of the master had been studying law in Boston. Ada was cleaning the entry hall's brass fittings when his carriage pulled up. When he entered the room, he stopped, not because he saw his father, but because he saw her. For a moment, their gazes locked. He grinned. She didn't. Unlike his father, Nathaniel was different. He had disheveled hair. The Delta's allure was absent from his discourse. He raised questions that caused the overseer to narrow his eyes and cited writers that nobody on the plantation had read. He discussed freedom at dinner in polite questions rather than in preaching. "Do you think that a man born into chains can ever be truly broken if his mind is still free?" he asked Amos at one point. Amos responded with a scowl, a laugh, and then quiet. "Boy, you have been reading too much." Ada stood invisible in the doorway, watching. Nathaniel began questioning her, although not publicly or in public, but he persisted in the hallways. She did the cleaning. On the kitchen table, he placed books. At one point, he inquired about her mother's name. He didn't recoil when she told him. He stated it aloud, May as though calling forth a buried object. She listened, even though she didn't trust him. And one evening, she entered the old stable's attic. He had left her the first book. It was a work of poetry, words she had never seen before, words about recollection, rivers, and flight. She read until daybreak, not to get away, but to get ready. Because Nathaniel didn't know what Ada did. Blood is still remembered in the earth beneath the magnolia's deep roots. Instead of returning to the Wycliffe estate as a victor, Nathaniel Wycliffe was a more enigmatic figure, a son fashioned somewhere else, bearing concepts too delicate for the soil in which he was born. Boston had transformed him. Amos had destroyed most of his letters unread, although they had alluded to it. The man now stood in front of his father as if he were a stranger, attempting to recall a house that had vanished. The fields did not fascinate him. He did not approach the overseer. He sipped from his glass while Amos talked about yields, obligations, and trespasses while he ate in silence. Nathaniel's gaze strayed to the framed oil pictures, the silverware, and the hands that served them, hers in particular. Ada no longer moved in an undetected manner. He observed her shamelessly, but never with the savagery of other white guys. More than the Lears ever did, his inquisitive, even reverent stare unnerved her. Perhaps a more perilous hunger is reverence. He didn't give her commands when he initially spoke to her in private. When she brought fresh linens to his quarters, he asked, "Do you read?" She responded silently. He went on, "I left that book on the kitchen table, the one by the stove. I didn't forget it. I left it for you." She looked him in the eyes for a moment. No response, no expression. However, the book vanished from the table that evening. He started looking for her in calm areas, asking questions and having conversations instead of giving orders. "If she have siblings?" he inquired. She didn't respond. "Did she dream?" he inquired. She remained silent. Nevertheless, he addressed her as though they were speaking a coded language developed for a purpose. He discovered her fixing a damaged shutter in the garden shed one evening after a storm when the air was heavy with smoke and pine. Raindrops trickled down the sides of the roof. "You don't have to be afraid of me," he subtly stated. "I'm not," she said without raising her gaze. He moved in closer and said, "Then speak freely." She paused her work and turned to face him. He remained silent when asked, "And what would you do if I did?" But he changed in some way. The attic, where Ada had first read his novel, was where they first met. Their remarks lengthened there, amongst forgotten paintings and Moten trunks. He talked of a buddy who assisted fugitives in crossing state lines, of abolitionist meetings he had attended, and of speeches murmured in taverns. He appeared to have faith in a society where benevolence and reason might free people from shackles. Ada always paid attention. He eventually admitted that he had considered releasing her. "As a beginning, not as a gift," he remarked. "You are worthy of living somewhere else." "You talk as if you have the right to grant freedom," she remarked. "I spoke like a man who wants to atone for his blood's sins." He arrived at for her hand. She didn't recoil. She gave him the impression that it had significance. Weeks went by. They used the attic as both a theater and a haven. He read her letters he had never sent, abolitionist pamphlets and poems. He informed her that he was prepared to sell his inheritance, quit the estate, and accompany her north. "We'll vanish," he said. "I can rely on friends, safe houses, and codes. We'll be gone before the frost if you say yes." And codes. "We'll be gone before the frost if you say yes." Ada didn't say anything that evening, but she came back the following day. The plot developed in whispers, with roots in Natchez, documents made in New Orleans, and a Quaker contact close to Memphis. Giving her an ancient map, he kissed her palm as if it were holy text. However, she never mentioned her mother, the whipping post, or the lesson it had taught her, that promises were only worth money if they were paid for with blood. Nathaniel clasped her hand once more one morning as they strolled around the orchard's perimeter. A whisper, "I'll free you," he said. "By truth, not merely by law. You will never again bow down to anyone." Ada smiled for the first time. She recognized the type of man who said such things not because she trusted him. A man brave enough to whisper to a slave but too scared of his father to speak loudly. A man who believed he might be forgiven by love. She would give him a chance. The stirrings of escape came as the summer progressed and the evenings grew thicker. With a calmness that hid the storm forming behind her eyes, Ada went through the days. She committed timetables to memory, counted footsteps, recorded which windows gave way to pressure and which locks creaked. Full of purpose, Nathaniel gave her silver coins wrapped in cloth, papers stamped with strange names, a brass key to a stable door that no one used anymore, and slivers of hope. He referred to it as preparation. "Proof of intention," she said. She still gave him the impression that it was trust. The sky would be on their side if they waited for the week without a moon, he insisted. He whispered in the attic. I've spoken to a man outside Vicksburg. To her. He can lift us up. Skiff, then train to Ohio, and then we disappear. Vanish, Ada said again, as if she were tasting a strange word. Plans, however, carry a weight, and weight always gravitates toward the earth. Too much had been seen. A misplaced token, an excessively loud whisper, or a door left ajar. Ada was never aware of their betrayer. Whether it was Nathaniel, reckless in his developing love, the field boy who coveted her, or the cook who observed too intently. All she knew was that the transformation happened quickly. The morning before dawn, she was abruptly roused from her bed with only hands, white, hard, and decisive, and no voice or explanation. She had not worked in the fields for years until they pulled her there. Crenshaw, the overseer, looked at her without asking any questions. The house is too soft for you, the master murmured. She labored in the sun for 3 days, causing her skin to peel, her fingers to bleed, and her back to scream. Yet she never asked for water. She claims that she forgot where she came from. She did not beg. Nathaniel was nowhere to be found, not in the fields, not in the stables, not in the attic. And in the silence that remained, there was a revelation more bitter than any whip. Whether out of guilt or fear, he had failed her. He had done nothing. He had said nothing. And his promise had vanished in the face of his father's will. On the 5th day, Ada felt the last ember of illusion die. Not just about Nathaniel, but about salvation. She would not run, not now. Freedom taken in fear was no freedom at all. It would rot, disappear, and be replaced by new chains of dependence. She would not flee with the assistance of a man who flinched at his own shadow. She would not beg for a parchment that still called her formerly owned. She recalled May's blood drying beneath the whipping post. She recalled the sound of silence after the last blow. As she heard it, she heard her mother's gaze again, not as a memory, but as a command. Amos was sitting in the parlor drinking bourbon when she came in. He didn't look up when she walked in. You forget yourself, he said. No, sir, Ada said softly. I remember everything. He waved her away, but she didn't move. You'll find your place again, he said coldly, or you won't. Either way, I'm done talking. She bowed and turned. At that moment, she knew something he didn't. Winter arrived early that year, and the air turned brittle, sharp enough to cut. Frost clung to the shutters of the Wycliffe house like fingers too stubborn to let go. The heat from the hearth did little to thaw the quiet that had settled within its walls since Ada's return to the house. Nathaniel had taught her maps and escape routes, and Amos had taught her the cruelty of patience. She would use both because she now understood that vengeance was a colder fire than freedom, and it burned longer. Ada saw more than just the tremble in his left hand, the way his appetite thinned, and the new cough that rumbled low and dry. It started after the harvest feast, which was a tradition among the landowning class, where whiskey flowed and speeches dragged like sermons. He said it was a celebration of control. Amos Wycliffe walked more slowly now, changed, quieter, slower, with eyes that did not blink when spoken to. He complained of aches in his joints, but Ada saw more. He insisted that everything be flawless: roast ham, molasses pie, and cornbread without a flaw. Ada, who had been put back in charge of the kitchen, was tasked with supervising the preparations, and the staff moved cautiously under her direction. Unaware of her newfound power, she never raised her voice. No one noticed what she added to the bourbon, not the rat poison, which was too visible and traceable, but something slower and more subdued, a tincture taken from a deceased midwife's journal that was kept under the quarter's floorboards. Amos became ill 3 days after the feast, but he refused to see doctors because he was sure he would recover. Strong stock, he grunted. No sickness ever took me. But Ada knew better. She made his tea, brought his broth, and sat quietly in the corner of his study while he scribbled in his notebook. At first, it had caused no pain, just fatigue, then stomach cramps, then fever. He was unable to concentrate on the ledgers, so she added just enough, a pinch here, a drop there, but never more than was necessary. A week into his illness, Nathaniel returned home. He had been in Natchez, supposedly finishing up papers, and his eyes widened when he saw his father, pale, sweating, and with hands shaking so much that he was unable to sign his name. "He needs help," he said, and Ada looked at him. "He has help." Nathaniel paced the halls for days, alternating between fear and loyalty, asking questions. Too many. Ada calmly and detachedly responded to each one, saying, "It's just the season. He's tired." And the weather has turned. Nathaniel arrived at her room at night, whispering about new plans and talking about leaving before spring. "Once he's gone, we can go without chains," she said, touching his face with fingers that had ground herbs into powder, giving him the impression that they still shared something intact. Nathaniel stared at the body like a boy seeing the sea for the first time. It was vast, unknown, and full of hidden weight. The burial was quick, cold earth, no sermon. The will had been updated weeks earlier in a shaky hand. The land, the house, and the people passed to Nathaniel. He died on a Sunday morning just before the bell rang. His breath stammered once, then stopped. There was no violence, no struggle, just silence. His hands, steadied by inheritance, trembled less at night when he delivered Ada the manumission papers. "It's done," he said. "You're free." "We can still go north," he whispered, reaching for her hand as she studied the parchment, folded it slowly, and remained silent. "You are no longer bound here." "No," she answered, "I'm not." After giving him a cheek kiss, she walked out of the room, leaving the home to creak in its new quiet. Ada held her manumission in silence, the words declaring her free curling slightly at the corners already touched by the damp freedom declared by the same family that once owned her blood, her breath, and her silence. Nathaniel didn't see her. Outside, the magnolia trees had started to bud early. The roots had been fed. The paper meant nothing. Ink on parchment sealed by a son's hand, too late to matter. After that night, he looked for her again in the stables, the quarters, and the attic where dust now ruled instead of whispers. Her room was empty, the fire was low, and the only thing left on the windowsill was the folded paper, which was weighed down by a stone. He rode into Natchez, hoping she had gone to find the river, hoping to find her among the throng of freed women selling bread by the docks. He asked at the post, at the chapel, and in the colored quarters, but no one had seen her, or maybe no one wanted to talk. The house moaned beneath his footsteps as if it remembered her more than it remembered him. Spring arrived early once more, and the magnolia bloomed wide and open, fragrant and unbothered. The harvest continued, but the hands moved differently now. When Nathaniel passed, there were glances, a watchfulness in their silence, something coiled just beneath the surface. Then the letters started to arrive, not to Nathaniel but to the nearby plantations. Each story carried the scent of meticulous planning. None of them led back to Wycliffe, but Nathaniel knew. Silent notes left under kitchen doors, names listed without explanation, codes written like sermons. A house marked with chalk near Port Gibson was burned to the ground. A ledger disappeared from a plantation near Brookhaven, along with 3 of its strongest men. A slaveholder in Natchez reported that his cook, freed months earlier, had vanished along with his daughter and a pair of silver pistols. He dreamed that he had found an old map in the attic, the one he had once given her, with new marks on it. Routes carved with exact precision, crosses over towns, dots near rivers, places where something had happened, or would. He had written to friends in Boston to ask if a woman named Ada had passed through their networks, but the answers came slowly, if at all. They said there was no record under that name, but someone was helping them get out, someone who knew the land better than we did. He started to see her face in every stranger's eyes as he drank more and spoke less because he sometimes saw her walking barefoot through the cane fields, leaving no prints, a shadow next to a lantern light, a whisper in the woods. He once followed a rumor all the way to Jackson, a freed woman who was tall, quiet, read from memory, and disappeared when questioned too much. He arrived a day too late, and the church where she had slept had burned to ash, and no bodies were discovered. Back at Wycliffe, he discovered the old books she had read, still concealed behind the loose brick, marked with symbols he didn't recognize anymore. Circles, stars, lines drawn like maps. and he burned them out of fear of what they meant. Years went by, the Wycliffe name faded, the estate grew smaller, the soil stopped producing what it used to. Nathaniel became thin and gray, a man haunted by his failures rather than his actions, and Ada became a whisper that moved between plantations. Some referred to her as a ghost, while others called her a thief. The bolder ones called her a mourner's daughter. They said she never smiled, but in every recounting, she always recalled the expression in her mother's eyes. They also said she appeared when chains clattered too loudly, carried a ledger of names, and crossed them off one by one. They said she didn't kill, but instead made sure those who had worn the whip felt the weight of it in other ways. Disappearances, fires, and vanishings that left no trace. Those who believed they were free pay some in silence over time, and once freedom is lost, the hand that attempted to hold it never forgets.